Welcome back to the channel. I hope you enjoy. I used to work in a paper factory. There were dark places where no one went. Part 2. I was basically in the same place, except it was different. The lights were dimmer, and they had a reddish hue. It cast everything in an eerie red glow. I wondered if we had lost power and the emergency lights were on. I stepped forward and looked around. Many things seemed the same, but there was no sound. No machines running, no forklifts zipping here and there, no voices on intercoms. It was completely still. Even the air didn't seem to be moving. My mind sent an emergency alert saying I didn't want to be in this place. I turned to step back through the cloud, but it had vanished. I looked around, but it was nowhere to be found. It was strange because I had only taken a few steps. I decided to look around and see if it would reappear. I walked over to the paper press machine that had been running when I was unstacking the paper rolls, but it was still. No one was there attending it. There was something else odd. It had a layer of dust on it as if it hadn't been used in years. But the strangest thing was a pile of bones sitting on the floor in front of the machine. I recoiled at the sight of the bones that glowed red in the ambient light. I backed away from them, wondering whose they were and what had happened. For one ludicrous moment, my eyes darted to the first aid cabinet. And then I came to my senses and retreated from them as though I expected them to reanimate and lunge for me horror movie style. I was rattled. Why and how would that happen? If someone was playing a joke, it wasn't a very funny one. Keeping an eye on the bones, just to be sure. I went over to the machine where the suck-up had been running her workers to death. It was also still and had a layer of dust on it. As I approached, I saw another pile of bones. They glowed red in the light, but when I shone the flashlight on them, they were as white could be. Strangely, they were piled in the spot the operator would stand. I stepped away and went down the length of the machine, finding another pile of bones in the next station. This went on for the entire machine. Wherever there was a workstation, there was a pile of bones. What the hell was going on here? What was that dark cloud? Did I just pass into some personal hell? Everything about the factory looked the same except for the disused machines and the piles of bones. Had I somehow transported back in time? Questions bombarded me as I continued through the old part of the factory, finding not a living soul, but bones at machines where they should be. As I roamed in total silence, something else struck me as odd. There were no supplies on the shelves, no completed projects waiting to be shipped, no booklets to feed into the machines, nothing. As I went from the old section into the new, I was suddenly assaulted by sound. It was as if someone had just flicked a switch and turned it back on. I looked over at the machines and quickly dove for cover. There were operators here running the machines, but they were skeletons. They were doing everything an operator should do. There was one loading a machine, another unloading it, and there was even a skeleton driving a forklift, taking the finished work and stacking it on a shelf. The strange thing was, as soon as the forklift driver would set a pallet full of finished work on the shelf, it would disappear into thin air as if it never existed. I snuck past a few more machines with the same bizarre crews. They were working just like any normal worker would on any given day. They just didn't have skin or muscles or eyes. I hid as best I could when the forklift went past me. Then I snuck around the machine and headed toward the break room. I peeked in through the window and saw several skeletons sitting at tables the way workers would as if taking a break. The utter impossibility of the scene was wearing on my sanity. I kept trying to wake up as though this was a nightmare, but I couldn't. Past the break room was the main door to the factory. I quietly tried to open it, but it was locked. My escape blocked, I went up the stairs to the offices. Usually I wouldn't be allowed upstairs. None of us common workers were allowed upstairs unless we were summoned. I made my way to the first office and peeked in. Instead of a skeleton behind the desk, there sat a nightmare. It was a corpse. The skin was sagging on her face with congealed blood in several places, and there were openings to see through her cheeks. I could even see the hint of teeth, but she was dressed in a business suit as going about normal daily routine things like filing papers and typing on the computer. Even her hands were partially covered with skin and partly skin rotting off the bones. I waited until her back was turned to the door and slipped past to look into the other offices. The next few were the same. Rotting corpses dressed in office attire and doing their jobs as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Was I losing my mind? I found a chair in an empty boardroom and sat for a moment to collect my thoughts. What was this insane place? Was I in my own personal hell? Was this some purgatory for factory workers where they had to continue to work on in the afterlife? As I pondered these things, I heard another sound. A growl. It wasn't like an earthly animal I'd ever heard. It was like someone had combined the growl of a lion with a Tyrannosaurus Rex from Jurassic Park. The sound reverberated through the walls, coming closer by the second. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the growl intensified. I searched frantically for some place to hide, to get as far away from this thing as I could. My mind shuddered with fear, imagining the nightmare that was about to consume me. I found the darkest corner I could and squeezed myself into it, praying that no part of me could be seen. As a last resort, I pulled a chair in front of me, slowly so it wouldn't make any noise. A cloud of mist drifted into the room, making me freeze in terror. I felt the first footstep before I saw the massive footstep into the room. It was like a giant claw attached to a massive sinewy leg. It was covered in dark scaly skin like a giant lizard. The slight opening between the back and the seat of the chair was my only protection and my only way of seeing this horrid creature. The belly and arms were made of the same dark scales, and for an instant, I thought I saw a hint of leathery wings flowing behind it like a cape. I couldn't see the head, and I was glad about that. I think if I had been able to, I would have screamed regardless of the danger. That's the end of part 2. Thanks for taking the time to listen to one of my videos. I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.